It's the SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast with Tony Rourke and Kevin O'Flaherty.
SeizeYourBusiness.com, making you money. Share it on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn, Twitter, our blogs, YouTube videos. Listen to our podcast, getting so hot that it's burning up the stereo.
Welcome to the SeizeYourBusiness.com podcast, coming to you from our speakeasy in lovely downtown Downers Grove. Our guest today is Ken Levin from Levin's Enterprises. Our hosts are Kevin O'Flaherty from O'Flaherty Law and myself, Tony Rourke from ADR Business Resource Group. If you find the podcast helpful or if you just want to help us out, we would appreciate it if you would review us on iTunes or share our podcast on social media. So without further ado, I'll hand this over to Kevin.
So our topic today is going to be the cloud and should I? Ken, thanks for being here. We appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about what you do?
What I do really is strategic consulting. I have a phrase that I use. I try to tell everyone to come up with 9 or 10 words to describe what you do. And I love being creative with technology and making business run better. I'm sure that's pretty damn close to 10 words.
How did you get into that?
I got into it because my history is technology. I was a chief technology officer for Rand McNally and the chief information officer for a company called American Utility Management. And I've been a director and CIO for Taco Bell and Arby's restaurants.
Wow. And you were mentioning you've got some pretty big clients that you work with right now.
Currently, last year and beginning of this year, I worked with Werner Co. They make Werner ladders. They're the largest manufacturer of ladders in the U.S., and they're expanding internationally. And I helped them come up with a global website strategy using content management and Amazon Web Services. And I worked with Emerson Electric to help them with a divestiture of power transmission systems, which was a $1.6 billion sale of theirs. They specialize in acquiring and divesting companies, and I was lucky to be asked to help project manage the technology side of the divestiture.
So before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the IT stuff that you do, I bet a lot of the people that are listening to us would love to even have the opportunity to get in front of the clients that you're working with. How did you get to that level where you're working with pretty big companies?
It's word of mouth. I think in being a part of the community, it's who you meet, who you know, who you develop relationships with so that they can learn to trust your judgment and trust what you do. All the work that I've done has been really through word of mouth and recommendations from friends and compadres.
Okay.
When you first how long have you been a consultant?
Actually, I started my consulting business in 2009.
Okay.
And I actually took a job as a CIO in the interim, and I was really just doing straight consulting for the last 2 years. Have been doing.
Did you have your 9 or 10 word catchphrase already figured out at that moment?
No, it was a process of working with customers and figuring out the marketing side of technical projects. Okay. As soon as somebody says technology, usually their eyes glaze over.
Or that sound.
Bzz. Right.
You're right.
Exactly. And so I encourage folks, if somebody asks you what your project's about, say it in 10 words and make sure they understand what it is with those 10 words.
Well, Tony, I'll be honest with you. When we did the accounting podcast, you kind of let me take the lead because, that was my world. This is much more your world than my world. I can barely turn my computer on, as we say earlier.
Well, so was that code for Tony? Take over?
Yeah, well, as we get into the technicalities, I'm going to need your expertise on this one because you know what you're doing with this sort of.
I get it a little.
So let's talk a little bit about the cloud and should I? Tell me about what's going on with the cloud.
The cloud's actually, before I start, I want to thank a couple of folks. Kevin Rich from the Rich Group with Merrill Lynch, and Mark Munder and your two selves, Kevin and Tony, for inviting me along for this podcast.
Not a problem.
It's an honor.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here.
Now, what about this cloud and should I? Cloud's the hot button today, and everyone in the corporate side and small enterprise side says, should I do the cloud? And they're very wary of it, and it's warranted to a certain degree. But if any of you use Dropbox at home,
we use it at our office.
You're in the cloud. You use iTunes? You store your music on iTunes?
Please give us a review on iTunes if you're listening.
You're in the cloud, and so we use the cloud every day. Do you get the New York Times on your tablet?
Mm-hmm.
New York Times runs on Amazon Web Services.
Ken, what's the cloud? What's your definition of that?
The cloud are computers and people that run computers that aren't in your home or your business. Right? So if you're using technology and you're not running any of that technology, most of the time you're using something in the cloud. It's a service that's being provided to you. Again, like iTunes. You run iTunes on your phone, but you don't know or don't care, how it gets to you. I equate it to a rental car business. When you go to rent a car, I don't care how much the car costs. I don't care how many people it takes to keep the car running. I want the car there when I need it, and I want to give it back when I'm done with it, and I only want to pay for my fair share of usage for that car, and I don't want to have to invest the capital to buy it.
Sure.
So that's the cloud.
So you're basically
just renting technology.
Okay. Now, when I first moved into my office, there was the previous people that had been there had a room, probably almost as big as this bar we're sitting in. That was the server room, and that's what they used it for. They stored some things there, but it was where their server was, and now that's an office for somebody because we're on the cloud. Are servers kind of a thing of the past, or?
By the way, the cloud is servers. It's just a question of whether or not in the business you're in and at the maturity level you are with your technology, whether or not you trust moving the equipment out of your business. If you're in the financial services business, you're probably a little bit more wary of storing your information on computers where, quite frankly, you don't know who's next door. Mm-hmm. Right? Speaking in server terms.
And from a security point of view.
And from a security standpoint. But at the same time, when you invest in the cloud, you're investing in top-notch security. Amazon and Apple, all those organizations hire the best security people in the world because, quite frankly, they know they're a target. A lot of folks who run servers in closets don't know how good their security is. And so it's something to consider.
So when someone says, to me, being an attorney, having my files on the cloud, are they secure? And if I'm using Dropbox, is that it sounds like that's just as secure as having them in a closet at my office.
And I'm no expert on security, but I'll tell you, if you have them on a server in your office and the server is not connected to the internet, then they're probably pretty secure.
Sure.
Your server is connected to the internet, then Dropbox probably has better security.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay. It's interesting. It's a target, but they spend a lot of money making sure that they're secure and locked down. And if you had servers in your office, how much money did you spend on security?
Sure. Yeah, then an average business owner really doesn't know.
Correct.
They don't know how to lock it down.
And
I would guess they don't even know how to wrap their head around that concept lockdown.
It's money spent it's like buying a boat. They say, it's a hole that you throw money into. And a lot of times you can look at the computer equipment that you buy in that same fashion. I need this for security. How's it help me develop my product or run my business? Mm-hmm. And the answer is no, it helps keep your business secure. Well, I'd rather use that money in another way.
Sure.
And that's when you start talking about the cloud services and renting. Can I use my capital in another way that moves my business forward?
Got it.
When we talk about cloud storage solutions, do you have one that you prefer?
I use Dropbox.
You use Dropbox?
Yeah, I use the ones that tend to be low cost. And Dropbox has worked for me because I have it on several different devices, and whenever I put something in Dropbox, all the devices get it, and I don't have to do anything. And I can go downstairs and use it on a laptop downstairs, and upstairs my laptop's being updated.
Sometimes these interviews turn into initial consultations for me with the business owner. One issue I've had with Dropbox is it's worked great for me and my firm, but when I started doing these podcasts and I've got these giant video files, they don't seem to upload to Dropbox. Is that something where I just need to get that figured out? Is that something that's possible?
It's a good question, and of course now you've put me on the spot a little bit. There are some limitations in terms of bandwidth, and Dropbox. I don't know what their charge is now, $99 a year, and you get 100 gigabytes or something.
Actually,
like that.
You get a terabyte for $100.
Terabyte?
Yeah, I just did it last week.
if they're not uploading well, it's probably the bandwidth you have at home. So at home, I have 50 megabits of Comcast download, and I don't know, 20 or so up. If you're running on 12 megabits or 30 megabits at your office, and you got a humongous video file, it may take a while to go up because, by the way, somebody's Googling something and somebody's streaming music and somebody's downloading something at the same time or that same bandwidth. So I have a saying that bandwidth is a platform of the future. So it increases your performance significantly.
When we talk about bandwidth, we're not talking about Dropbox being the limitation. We're talking about Comcast or AT&T or
the pipe between your computer and Dropbox.
Okay.
That line.
It's the size of the wires coming into the office and how much, think of it as a hose and water flowing through the hose. And 50 megabits is more water going through it, at the same time than 30. It's a smaller hose.
And with more bandwidth, does that come faster general internet speed?
Yes.
Okay. So if I want faster internet or if I want to upload these things, what I would do is I'd call Comcast or AT&T or whoever my provider is and say I want more bandwidth and pay them for it.
Correct.
Okay.
And there are several different types of bandwidth that you can get. Business bandwidth, you need fast up and down. Usually at home with Comcast, you get fast down, but not so fast up.
Okay. What sort of resistance do you see from business owners to getting on the cloud, and what do you tell them when they give you objections?
Actually, can I interact
please.
on that? Because I think there's actually two questions there because Ken works with both enterprise and small business owners. That's all I had to add.
Okay.
Just clarification there more than anything else.
And it's interesting with large businesses and small businesses. There's really two categories, and it's different when you're talking to the financial individuals, the CFO, et cetera, than when you are talking to the CIO of a company. The first one is security. I don't want our financial data up in the cloud. And my next question is when's the last time you had a penetration test or somebody actually come in and try and hack your business? How secure is it? Are the doors locked, or some of the doors unlocked and you just don't know? And the sign of a good hacker is somebody you don't know has opened your door. Sure. And the second one, and I had an individual who's a very good friend, runs a CIO at a very large company, and he said, well, with the cloud, you're just trading capital for expense. And to a degree, he's right. I always say if you can use your money and spend it on computers and servers like Amazon or Apple and make more money than you can by leaving that money in the bank or developing your product with it, then you're right. You're trading capital for expense. But if you can spend $100 a month for something and not have to put $3,000 into it, you can take that $3,000 and leverage it to develop your product or spend it on marketing or spend it on SEO, any type of other activity that doesn't require going to a store and buying a computer and putting it in. Now, part of it too is people.
Okay, now we're going there. Okay.
All right, and one thing is hardware. The other thing is that you got to find good people who know security and know how to administer email servers and web servers, etc. And you can find them, but a lot of times they're underutilized. Depending on the size of your business, a person can run a shop of 200,000 or a shop of 50. But the person that's being used to run 200,000 servers or 200,000 units of anything is being utilized far more efficiently than an individual who's being paid to run a shop of 50. And so part of it is leveraging the resource, which is getting more and more expensive as security becomes more and more of a concern.
When you have a CIO, they'll ask you or make that comment about trading capital for expense, are they putting the human being in that equation in their own head, or are they just looking at the hardware initially?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
And they're putting the human being in